I'm now joined by Brian Beary. He's a journalist and an expert on the European Union, also a contributing editor to European Affairs. Welcome to you, Brian.
Jessica.
So TTIP, which is also called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, but we call it TTIP for short, that is the transatlantic trade agreement that Owen was referring to in the piece. How would a leave vote impact that trade negotiation?
I think it could suck the oxygen out of the room, to put it. The UK was one of the strongest advocates of this TTIP. The UK is a very pro-trade nation. It was pushing its EU colleagues to go for this when some of them, like France, were not so keen about it. So that's one thing. Once it leaves the room, that will change the mood. The motivation on the US side may change as well. So definitely it doesn't help things, but you know, at this point that they've made slow but steady progress.
Very slow, though.
3 years they've been negotiating. You know, the Trans-Pacific one took,
I think it's already at 9, yeah.
Yeah, so by trade talks comparison, 3 years is not that long. And they were hoping to wrap it up in the next year or so. So, you know, it's not that far away, and I think that momentum would be hurt wsome question.
Some have also said that the UK may have to go to the back of the line, so to speak, if they leave the EU. Leave folks say they'll just negotiate new deals. How do you think this would play out?
They may not be at the very back of the line, but they're certainly not going to be at the front of the line. And one of the practical reasons is it will take several years for them to negotiate an exit from the European Union. And that has to precede any free trade talks. So, for example, there's millions of British pensioners living in Spain. What are their rights to hospitals there? There are thousands of British people who work for the EU institutions. Do they have to, you know, get up and just go back to England?
In fact, somebody told me earlier this week that it could take 5 years to unwind the British from the European Union if it passes.
It's been a 43-year marriage. And you know, the divorce would be very messy, and it would take several years. Yeah.
Now, of course, businesses have been very loudly saying on both sides of the Atlantic, really, that they are arguing for a stay vote. How do you expect a leave vote to impact not only the business community, but also the investment atmosphere?
There's unanimity among the business community that any kind of change or major uncertainty always is unsettling, and but particularly the British case, they see no compelling reason for Britain to leave. So there is a really big disconnect between, you know, the business community, which is overwhelmingly in favor of staying in and saying that it's shooting yourself in the foot to leave, and the broader British population, which seems pretty much evenly divided on it.
So what do you attribute it to that the business community in their campaigning hasn't been able to convince people that ostensibly stand to gain or lose from the decision economically, you know, the sort of average British person? What's the disconnect there? What do you attribute that to?
And this is me talking maybe a bit as with my Irish hat, my neighbouring, you know, you notice in the British media, there's just endless anti-EU stories, which is very different, say, from the Irish media, which is more nuanced. And I think you've had decades of this. And on top of that, you have politicians in Britain who often will sign up to something in Brussels and then return to London and say they had nothing to do with it. And so I think over the decades, it breeds really, the word Brussels is in the UK is just viewed as such a negative thing. It's very hard in the space of a 1 or 2 year referendum campaign to erase that. And I think in referendum also, people vote with their heart more than with their head. And emotionally, you know, the sort of appeal of British patriotism is really driving the Leave campaign, I think.
Lastly, you know, the U.S. Central Bank has certainly been very clear that it's concerned about the outcome in relation to interest rates and its own decision. I can't imagine other central banks around the world are feeling differently. With the uncertainty of this vote, how do you see any type of lobbying or pressure coming from governments around the world on the vote? I mean, can they make a difference?
The one country that's been vocal so far is President Obama. president, I should say, of a country. And he has said very explicitly that this is not a good idea. And that's interesting and a little unusual, because typically one doesn't wade into domestic referendum, into internal politics. But I think it tells you the strength of views within the business community and beyond, that this is not a good idea. I think if Britain was to vote to leave, the rest of the world would wake up to this earthquake, and because it would have a lot of unintended and unforeseen consequences.
All right. Our thanks to you, Brian Beary. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Thanks for your time.
If you like what you just saw, follow us on social media and visit our website, CCTV-America.com.